Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Okay, I'm going to start with kind of an analogy for what we're going to be talking about. So imagine you have arranged for a friend to come and visit you in your town. They've never been before, and they haven't looked up where things are on the map either ahead of time. You say to them, hey, let's meet up at the top of the high street when you get here. And in their confidence, they say, okay, see you later. You're there waiting and it's getting late and they haven't shown up. It turns out they have a really poor mental map of your town and they've managed to get themselves completely lost. This is kind of an analogy for what we're going to be talking about, which is that our audience has different mental models of the way the world works from the way we understand things. And we might be making assumptions about how people are interpreting our messages, which can lead to them coming to completely different conclusions. And the sort of starting point for this research study that we're going to be telling you about is this kind of like vegan advocacy that's, really popular. There's tons and tons of different approaches. And we sort of looked at like what's out there, and there's all these different strategies. Is this still working?
I think so.
No, it's just turned on. Is it?
It is.
Yeah.
Try this one.
Where was I? There's all these different strategies, and there's all these different strategies. That totally threw me. Okay, so when we talk to advocates about how do you come up with these, messages, and the decisions are often guided by intuition, personal experience, gut feeling, and that is really important. We need to be using our kind of tacit knowledge, our expertise, but there is a risk that potentially some of these messages can be backfiring, or maybe there's ones that we're underutilizing that could be more effective. And in our research so far, what we found is that there's quite a large amount of variability in which messages work. So some are super effective, others are less effective, and then others still even backfire and counterproductive. People end up being less empathetic with animals after they've been exposed to particular messages. So if as a movement, some people are using message A, others are using message D or E, what happens is our sort of average effectiveness collectively could be fairly small. So the idea is if we can do some research and figure out which messages are most effective and kind of hone in and focus on those which are more effective, we can collectively increase our sort of average effectiveness. So yeah, we're really excited to present this research. It's the biggest study we've done, and to the best of our knowledge, it's the largest message testing experiment that's been done in the movement. So we first started by kind of reviewing all the different types of messages that are out there, and we found that there's these 12 sort of themes or narratives or different approaches. So for example, you might have messages which try and highlight speciesism, or maybe they are focusing on asking people to go vegan, and within each of these, there's multiple kind of ways you can approach them. So for example, the strategy of appealing to values, you can appeal to different values like truth and respect, dignity, care. And then within each of these, you've got different, you can break these down further basically. So when you break all that down, we found 86 broad message types. And to run our study, we created 3 versions of each one. So, for example, here is an example of animal abilities, which is one of the narratives that we've previously found to be quite an effective narrative. So you've got kind of 3 different messages, each tapping into this idea that animals are unique individuals with sentience, with preferences, with joys. Here's another example. This one's speciesism. That you've probably seen messages like this, kind of trying to highlight that there's this sort of inconsistency in how we treat animals, that we treat some animals one way and others another way. So basically, to run the study, we created all of these messages, and the reason for creating our own versions was to try and keep the style of them kind of consistent, so they've got the same font, same color, and so on. When we piloted these, we went with, I guess, more sort of a traditional vegan color palette, which was like red and black. And we found basically in the focus groups, they just immediately were like, this is Peter trying to make me go vegan, even like when there was no mention of either of those things. So we went for this more kind of calmer color scheme that doesn't activate these sort of shorthands that people already have. And so basically the participants would see one collection of 3 messages. So like they might see the speciesism set. And we sort of asked them to kind of rate the concept as a whole rather than like individual messages. So for example, you know, if someone had just seen one message, it could be, oh, they thought like the pig was particularly cute or something. So it was kind of just to smooth over all those kind of idiosyncrasies. Oh yeah, so here I'll just talk you through like the method that we used. So we recruited a representative sample of 4,500 people, hence the title of the talk. We then gave them an animal attitude survey where we asked about things such as how they empathize with animals, how they see animals in the hierarchy with humans, actions like how open they are to changing their diet, and support for different policies. And then basically using some maths, we can create kind of a metric of like support for animal freedom that kind of weights all these things together. We then split that sample up into 86 groups, and each group saw one set of these messages. And then we asked them the same questions again, hearts, minds, actions, policy support. And what this allows us to do is to ask the question, you know, have their attitudes changed after seeing the message? Are there some messages where they have more positive attitudes after seeing it? And we've also been running focus groups, which is what Helen will be talking about, where we've been focusing on a subset of these messages. So far we've run these focus groups with 45 people where we have like 2-hour kind of in-depth conversations going into depth over certain messages. And so these 2 approaches, basically you've got the quantitative, where we can ask the question of like what works or what doesn't work, and the qualitative of like why do these certain things work. So together we get these like deeper insights and kind of more general principles of effective messaging.
Yeah, so to understand the focus group participants' responses, we kind of map them onto these 3 different aspects. We've got the first one, which is ideas about animals. And if you know anything about Animal Think Tank, you know that we would be calling those narratives. We are really into narratives. Can you click, please? So, for example, we were looking for, is this raising up positive narratives about animals that people hold in their minds? Things like they feel joy, they feel pain, they have families and social lives like us. Or negative things like animals are just driven by instinct or they're fundamentally separate from us. what's it doing in terms of reflection or defensiveness? So how are these messages prompting people to ask questions? Are they curious? Are they reflecting on their choices? Or is it about deflecting responsibility? This isn't about me, or shutting down, digging their heels in, defensiveness. And then also emotional responses. Is it prompting curiosity or interest, empathy, perspective taking? Or is it resistance to action and discomfort? So we kind of want sometimes to create a little bit of discomfort in people seeing the messages, but with a route forward, with a way of them reflecting and thinking forwards. If they're just uncomfortable and shutting down, then that's possibly not helpful. And there's a lot of nuance in this, so I've done very black and white or very green and red examples of what we were looking for, but there's a middle ground in that, so we're trying to judge, is this broadly, bringing up positive things or negative things, and mixed responses to every message. So there was not a single message where we're like, woo, this is entirely green, brilliant, this is the one we need to use. It was a bit of a mix. So we're just looking for overall patterns really to help us really understand those responses from participants.
Okay, so we're going to break the results down into 3 sections. So we've got the good stuff, the muddled stuff, and the spiky stuff. And we'll start with the good stuff. Oh yeah, so content warning. Most of these are fairly benign. The next slide has some not nice images. So we found a number of themes or narratives or strategies that were quite effective. So the first is messages which show the physical cruelty are effective. So these are just kind of 2 examples. There's variability as well. So what we found in the survey was that, well, firstly, every message had some people reacting where they kind of doubled down on their existing beliefs. They ended up with more negative attitudes after seeing those messages. So in this case, 10% of people ended up kind of less empathetic with animals than before. But 40% of our participants ended up having more empathy with animals after seeing these messages. Another set of messages which we found to be really effective were those kind of emphasizing the inner lives and individuality of animals. So yes, we can talk about physical suffering, but there's also the psychological suffering, the fear, the pain, just the suffering that comes with being confined. People really resonated with that. But you can also emphasize the positive aspects. So, for example, cows have BFFs. Did you know turkeys like to be hugged? Or that chickens purr when they're content? These messages only had like 5% of people reacting negatively to that, and up to almost a third of people responding positively to this strategy. And a similar kind of related narrative is we are family. So these are messages which try and highlight that animals they have families, they have friends and families, and that farming them is basically tearing families apart. And here's 2 examples. We kind of got a negative framed one about how, like I say, it's destroying families, but we can also emphasize that families come in all shapes and sizes, and we are part of one larger animal family. So yeah, this had up to 40% of people kind of responding positively after seeing these messages.
Yeah, and the same with the qual, the focus groups that we did. So we found that when we focus on who animals are, it's really bringing to the surface those helpful ideas about animals that we really want to be getting as a movement, more and more people talking in this way about animals. So for example, same set of messages, we've got this person talking about how sometimes people think that animals are different from us, but actually they're really similar. Personalities, family lives, they're caring individuals. And even with the more negatively framed messages, this idea that animals are suffering, they have feelings, and also really bringing to the surface, these animals deserve better, we should be doing better for them. And also when we focus on who animals are, these messages do a lot of hard work for us. So they join the dots, they give people the space to join the dots themselves. So I'm going to take you through an example of Yasin. One of the participants. So when he saw this message set, it really prompted curiosity for him. So he was saying, oh wow, like it's making me really see these animals in a different light. And actually I'm going to look up if turkeys do like to be hugged. Great, this is what we want. We want to be prompting people to lean in more to animals, find out more about who they are. And it prompted action because in the middle of the focus group, one Googled later, he's like, oh my God, they do. They really do like to be affectionate. They are curious animals. And he's reading information like this out to the rest of the participants in the focus group. And then he's also reflecting. He said he's gobsmacked. He usually thinks about turkeys in relation to food, a Christmas item. But he said, you don't really think about turkeys as having a personality. When we try to join the dots for the participants through our messages or for our audience, so like you can see, for example, here we're saying friends, not food. So we're trying to get that, we're trying to elicit that same response that Yasin had in the previous set of messages. He went through these and described the animals in the images. The pigs are looking cheeky, the turkey's having a cuddle, and the chicken looks really tasty. So when we're trying a bit harder to join those dots for participants, it's actually potentially backfiring slightly and activating the food frame. This is making Yasin think about turkeys as food, whereas previously he was thinking about turkeys or chickens as having personality and individuals. And throughout sharing these kind of messages that really focus on who animals are, we were constantly getting participants talking about their diet change. There was nothing in these messages talking about diet change, but they were talking about diet change. I only eat chicken meat at the moment, but in the not too distant future, that's going to be gone. And even with the more negative messages, which you think might potentially cause a bit more reactance. So this participant, it's making me feel really bad to eat meat. They love animals. And after seeing these pictures, I would be interested in reducing my intake. So focusing on who animals are brings helpful ideas to the surface and gives them the space to join the dots for themselves. So I'm going to talk about the muddled stuff because it's easier to identify that through focus groups and having conversations with people. So 2 aspects we're going to talk about. The first one is the knowledge gap. Just going to, bit of audience participation. You're all looking too comfortable. When you see this image, what kind of ideas does this bring up for you in this room? Yeah?
Separation from the animal's mum.
Separation from mum, isolation, anything else?
Dairy farming.
Dairy farming, yeah. So for us, this image is shorthand for a bunch of stuff. Systemic harm, separation from mum, suffering. When we shared this with participants in the focus group, and this lovely calf was in so many of our images, actually. First of all, is this a cow? Some people are not even sure what animal this is. And then in terms of suffering, they look quite healthy, and they've got this nice little house they can go in. If it's raining, there's food, they've got water. No understanding of this like zooming out image of all of these huts that we see or what this is representing. So our shorthand is not necessarily translating because people have a knowledge gap. So you can see the calf here. We use this image in messages trying to illustrate this idea or communicate animal freedom. And people here linked the calf to the robin. So these are the good images. These are what we want to see, is how the audience were interpreting this message. And it's the chicken and the pig who are struggling. So this calf is, not communicating the same thing that it would to a room full of animal freedom activists. We told stories of animals resisting oppression and escape. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Matilda, who escaped a farm and had 10 piglets in the woods, and now she's living in sanctuary. But unfortunately, people do not know animals very well, so they doubted Matilda's ability to be able to do this. So this concept that this pig is ready to escape and give birth in the woods without any human intervention, it's like, what? They cannot sort of compute that this would be possible. And unfortunately, what that leads to, doubting the animals, leads to doubting the messenger. So, this had a little bit of stronger language, which I slightly removed. They didn't escape on their own, very forcefully said. They were taken by humans, and whether you think that that's a good thing or a bad thing, you should be honest about that, is what this person was saying about the messenger. And so it was bringing up ideas that the messenger is dishonest, that we're using misinformation, there's a lack of transparency, we're acting illegally. Who does this sound like? Who do we talk about that behaves like this? Big animal ag, but people are seeing our messaging and thinking we are dishonest. So the other gap is a vision gap. So we think here in this message we're communicating animal freedom, and people respond positively, yeah. I do agree with this message. Animals do deserve freedom, but we continue the quote, they deserve not to be cooped up in a factory farm. So the question is, are we communicating animal freedom or free range? So it's quite a long quote. This was from a participant who grew up on a farm with cows, and she said, what we would have done with our cows in the winter is keep them inside, and then in the spring we let them out, and they literally run around wild in the field because they're so happy to be out in the fresh air and the freedom. To me, that is just the epitome of freedom for a wee calf. So this understanding that freedom really for them is a nice grassy field. We also communicated used messages to communicate the idea of sanctuary. And yeah, positive feelings coming up for this participant. This is how animals should be treated. They repeated these words about relationships and flourishing and peaceful and free. This participant understood sanctuary as a name of a farming organisation who are trying to spearhead ethical farming practices. And when people do have an understanding of sanctuary, there is still a question mark. There is still a gap in their knowledge about what sanctuary actually is. What happens at the end of the lives of these animals that are living on sanctuaries? They're not going to get a grave. They're going to be still going into the food system. So we have quite a bit of work there with a knowledge gap and a vision gap in our comms.
It's over to me. Okay. Right, is my mic working again? Yep. So we're going to now talk about some of the spikier messages. So these were ones which created maybe a bit more controversy. So this is one example which were messages trying to say basically we should be a voice for the innocent. We need to stand up for these victims, basically. We had about 20% of people moving one way, 20% of people moving another way, so kind of a net effect of 0. And I think the reason for this is that these messages implicitly make the audience the villain. We're saying that these are victims of humans and you are paying for this, you're part of this problem, you're the villain. People are really motivated to protect their identity, to see themselves as a good person. So rather than kind of change and accept that, a lot of people reject the message and yeah, try and maintain that sense of self. Another similar one was messages highlighting speciesism or our hypocrisy with how we treat other animals. So these are messages saying, you know, like, hey, we're a proud nation of animal lovers. Maybe we should treat all animals the same. Or why do we treat one, you know, why do we eat one and love another? So yeah, 15% of people reacted negatively, 20% reacted positively. So a small kind of net effect. This was quite a polarizing message. And again, I think this is because these messages are implicitly making the audience the villain. People want to kind of maintain this sense of a good person, that they are a good person. This next set of messages we found quite polarizing were ones which basically advocated for diet change. So we had a whole set. We had ones explicitly saying go vegan. We had ones saying plant-based, or, you know, for example here, these are just emphasizing peace. We had ones which were more direct about you individually, as well as ones which were we hoped would kind of lean on the idea of social progress, social proof that society's changing. We found these messages to be quite polarizing. I think, like, going back to what Helen was saying, we don't need to sort of bash people over the head with this idea. They can join the dots themselves and come to that conclusion. But what we do want to kind of point out, we don't want to say, like, don't ever tell people to change their diet or advocate for diet change or veganism. There are obviously about 20% of people, 1 in 5 people, do respond well to this kind of message. So with these kind of more polarizing messages, I think we need to just be careful with how we get them out there. So if we're just putting them out there blanket, potentially we could be pushing some people away. If we can target the people who are like almost vegan, they're like ready to go, then this could be like a super effective strategy. But I think kind of thinking about the psychology of this type of message, these messages kind of hit a lot of roadblocks. So as mentioned with the other ones, this is implicitly making the audience the villain. You know, again, 1 minute left already.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Go for it, Rob.
Okay, I'm going to skip. Oh my God.
Okay, yeah. So I'm just going to illustrate with a couple of participant examples about how these different types of messages were landing with different people. We have Veronica and Jim. Veronica, when we center who animals are, she's saying stuff like this is really connecting with me as a mum. It's pulling at my maternal heartstrings. And with Jim, seeing messages, focusing on who animals are and their experiences, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to be saddened by what's going on here and making this connection. I'm feeling a bit conflicted. I know that this is part of what is happening to animals to produce food. When we focus on people and behaviour, this kind of response from Veronica, I feel like I'm being guilted. These messages are emotionally manipulative. And she goes on to say, actually, I'm feeling quite angry. Choice is important to me, and this is trying to guilt trip me. And with Jim, he says these messages are aggressively emotional. Bearing in mind they've seen these really sad images of really emotional scenes of what's happening to animals. He describes the words boycott, cruelty, and the big plant-based as emotional words. And goes on to say, this makes me question the credibility of the messenger. Is this about moral superiority? Are we in this room using animals to get people to go vegan? So we have centering who animals are broadly is bringing up ideas of empathy, concern, perspective taking, even reflection on diet, joining the dots. People and identity and behavior focus messages, we have a risk of people doubling down, human-centric ideas, justifications, criticism of the messenger. And like Rob said, this is quite a common response. We're having this from a lot of the participants in the focus groups, regardless of what we know about their diet or their intention to change their diet before they join the focus group. But the people identity and change has a real risk of backfire. So the question that we think this is raising is we need a lot of people to see these kind of messages. And when they see these kind of messages, it's bringing up a bunch of really helpful stuff. What happens if we put a call to action on the bottom of every message like this that says this? This kind of thing, a go vegan message, or if people see our messages and with the black, white and red branding we talked about earlier, automatically have this implicit call to action that they see.
Okay, we're at the end now, I promise. So just to kind of very quickly wrap everything up. So we've talked about the good stuff, that is emphasizing the inner lives of animals, their suffering, both psychological and physical, that they have friends and family and joys, and we can let people join the dots themselves. The muddled stuff, there's a knowledge gap and a vision gap. Are they reinterpreting our messages through a welfare lens rather than a rights lens? And are we communicating the world that we want for other animals? And then finally, the spiky stuff. Are we threatening people's sense of identity and agency? And I do want to emphasize, there is a place for diet change messaging. I think we just have to be careful about how we get that message to the right people. So thanks very much for listening. And I've been told to mention our messaging guides. They're free. They're amazing. Come and check them out.
And they're all online as well if
Yeah.
you don't want to be.
Yeah, and thanks very much.